Hello and good morning. So today we are going to be going over a few fun different things. What to expect from this class in kickoff coaching is we're going to be talking about some best of the legal hotline. So the legal hotline through the WRA or any board that really you're in is there to do just that. It's there to help you, support you. Those dues that you pay every year go towards this. So really, every October this time of year is when our dues come due and we're like, oh my gosh, what are we paying for? Well, you're paying in part for this and for free advice from attorneys and for networking opportunities and constant support from people who are actively fighting for you in government. There was a quote yesterday when I opened up my GMAR dues in the mail, if you haven't gotten them yet, that said, basically, if you don't donate towards this, you become lunch. That RPAC, the Realtors Political Action Committee, they're actively working to help you every day. They're the ones showing up at the Capitol and fighting for things on your behalf that best are in the interest of realtors. So they're there to protect you. They also have attorneys on staff that add to this book every single month that you get in the mail. So if you don't have it, just check your mailbox, but there is a lot of really good stuff in here. And I wanted to go through a couple different best of legal hotline items that were in here. Tracy Ruka put them together and they all are regarding cash. And the theme of this month is cash really cash? And we get this question a lot and we talk a lot about this. So I want to make sure that we dive into it. And this really has a lot to do in regards to making a cash offer, but maybe it really isn't cash. And what does that even mean? And what are the rights of the buyer and the seller? Is it wrong to write a cash offer, but still not offer cash? So when I've explained this before, it can get kind of confusing until you actually do it and practice with a transaction. It can be kind of confusing what this means. So I want to go through some legal hot tips, which I think are going to clear a lot of things up for you. So the first question, the buyer wants to write an offer with no financing commitment contingency. How can the offer be drafted? What should the buyer consider when drafting an offer in this scenario? So that's a really good question. And my favorite answer is the answer is always in the contract. If you read the financing contingency and you go through it and get a full understanding of it, your answer is actually in there. But what I like about this is they put everything kind of in real terms, less contract terms. So it says, although it may sound like a flippant question, the licensee should ask the buyer if the buyer has the funds available to cover the full purchase price of the property. So in theory, yes, a cash offer or a non-financing commitment contingency offer means the buyer should still have the cash to cover, okay? If yes, fantastic. As the follow-up question, ask the buyer if they are able to provide written proof of funds as described in the offer. So it's in the offer within 7 days. It defaults to 7 days, but you can make your offer stronger by saying, we'll get you proof of funds in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, okay? If they do have a proof of funds, fantastic. What is a proof of funds? Again, it says it's described in the offer. It can be a letter from a financial institution verifying that the buyer has at the time of closing or at the time of the verification, not closing, the funds to buy the home, essentially. So if you're buying a $300,000 home, a letter from where the funds are held saying, yes, Mary Smith has $300,000 readily available, okay? Now, that doesn't mean Mary's going to use it to buy the home, but it means Mary has it, okay? That's a proof of funds or a statement with Mary's name on it, right? Because otherwise anyone could just Google $300,000 bank statement, right? Without a name, it means nothing, showing that she has the money. It says the offer may be drafted with no financing commitment contingency and no additions need to be made if the offer is not subject to financing commitment provision of the offer. So that's a provision in the offer. It's called if this offer is not subject to financing commitment provision. So there is a provision that's called that in the offer. If accepted, the buyer will timely provide the described proof of funds. So let's go back. What if the answer is no? What if when you ask the buyer, great, you want to make a cash offer, do you have the cash to do this? And they say, no. Then what? Follow up to determine how the buyer is going to obtain the funds for closing. Okay, help me understand. You want to write a non-financing commitment contingency offer, but you don't have the funds to buy the home. Okay. An offer may be drafted with an appropriate contingency to obtain such funds. Okay, so it's a custom contingency, right? You can write a contingency for anything you want, really. If you want to write a contingency that the seller before closing is going to paint the house purple, you can do that. If the seller agrees to it, what's the problem? So you can write something like that in additional provisions, or the last page of addendum A has a nice little blank contingency on so it's page 4 right before you sign, where you can write in a custom contingency where it says, if blank, then blank, and it kind of gives you the outline. If the answer to the second question is no, that they have no way of obtaining, then the follow-up question is, what can the buyer provide to the seller to give assurance that the buyer will be able to consummate the transaction? Interesting word. Then the offer may be drafted with no financing commitment contingency, and the evidence the buyer can provide can be written in the blank lines of the if the offer is not subject to the financing commitment contingency in the offer to purchase. So you can write your own manual thing that the buyer is going to provide. Maybe it is a copy of the accepted offer of the home that they are selling. If the seller's okay with that being what they provide, it's all kosher. But it has to be okay with the seller, right? If the seller signs the offer, they're saying, yes, I'm okay with that. So there are different ways you can get creative with that. Again, always just talk to your broker if you have any questions, but the offer does, if there isn't a proof of funds, it gives you an opportunity to fill in a blank line of what the buyer can provide as their proof of funds or their substitute for a proof of funds. Could be a few different things. Could be a copy of a letter from their grandma saying, I'm giving you a $300,000. If the seller's okay with it, then it's okay. That's the key. The seller has to be okay with what you fill in those lines with. Does that make sense? Any questions? Cool. Okay. The individual buyer wrote an offer without a financing commitment contingency. Okay. He would like to provide a letter from his place of employment that shows that the company has the assets to purchase the property or will lend the funds to the buyer. Will such a letter suffice as proof of funds? Okay, so it's kind of like the one before where we said if the seller, is okay with it. So this is a letter that they want to provide. The employer is willing to give them money. So what is the answer? Will that letter suffice as a proof of funds? So the hard answer is no, unless the buyer described that letter in the blank lines that we talked about. So it kind of answers the first question too. If that's what they're using to say that we're going to satisfy the not having a financing commitment contingency portion, then that's fine. If they didn't, then no. Then no, that does not suffice as proof of funds for a few reasons. It's not from a financial institution. The funds are the company's funds, not the buyer's funds. This is in reference to a potential loan. The funds are not available to the buyer at the time of verification. So that's why it's not a proof of funds. Okay. Upon drafting the offer, the buyer had different choices. The buyer could have included on the blank lines in item 2 of, proof of funds or an item. That's what the item could have been that they described. And then at the time of the presentation, the seller could agree to such proof of funds, or the seller could counter the offer. As another alternative, if the offer has been accepted and nothing was originally written on the blank lines, and the buyer cannot provide proof of funds as required for item 1, the buyer could attempt to amend the offer, which is harder to do, right? Because now you've got an accepted offer, now you've got to try and change it. The amendment would allow the buyer 4 different possibilities in this scenario. Provide for a different way of proof of funds, maybe that letter. They could amend to try to include a financing contingency. Good luck trying to get the seller to agree to that one. They could try and strike out the proof of funds requirement, right? Because you can always strike things out of the offer to purchase. Prior to the deadline, they could assign the offer to a buyer who can provide the proof of funds. And that would all be done via an amendment. If the buyer does not timely provide acceptable written verification or documentation and the parties cannot agree to amend, the seller may terminate the offer. That is in the contract. The seller terminates the offer by delivering written notice to the buyer after the deadline in the if this offer is not contingent on financing commitment contingency. Okay, so that's kind of two ways to talk about proof of funds, requirements of a buyer when they're writing a cash offer, or I don't really like to call it a cash offer because typically it's not always just cash. Sometimes, yes, a buyer is just paying cash, but sometimes a buyer is still getting a loan, but they happen to have the funds sitting somewhere else to be able to buy the house in the event that their financing fell through, right? What I like about the offer to purchase as well is it also gives the buyer permission to have an appraisal if necessary. And it says in the contract that the seller will comply with the buyer's appraisal process. However, it doesn't matter what the appraisal comes back at, that value, the buyer is still financially obligated to buy the house. So one more on these, I just want to kind of touch base on this because I think this is really, really helpful. So a seller accepted a cash offer and the buyer was supposed to deliver proof of funds within 14 days. So they didn't put 7 days on that deadline line, they put 14. But the buyer has not done so. Well, that's not good. The seller delivered a cancellation and mutual release, okay? But the buyer has not signed it. The seller is concerned that if the buyer now shows up with proof of funds, even though the deadline has passed, the seller would be obligated to go forward. Can the seller really terminate the offer? If so, how does the seller terminate the offer? It's a really good question. And I see where the purchase side or the selling side made a little bit of a mistake here, but we're going to talk about notices. Notices are really important when it comes to things like this. When the proof of funds is late, the seller has a choice to terminate the transaction by delivering written notice of termination, or the seller may allow the buyer more time to deliver the proof of funds. Per the terms of the if the offer is not contingent on financing commitment provision in the offer to purchase, the WB11, when a buyer does not deliver proof of funds by the deadline stated in the offer, the seller can deliver a written notice to the buyer terminating the offer. So if the seller only sends over a cancellation and mutual release, technically that seller could pop in at any time and deliver their proof of funds because that's what the offer says. The offer says by the earlier of the deadline, or if they actually do submit that. The notice of termination must be delivered before the seller has actual receipt of the buyer's proof of funds. So you need to send that notice. That notice is so important because that is what allows the seller to now say the transaction is over. Sending over a cancellation and mutual release does not mean that the transaction is over unless both parties sign it. Okay, you've got to make sure to enact that notice. Just like sending over an amendment does not mean the transaction is over. If you as an agent let an amendment pass or expire, that's your fault. A notice needs to be enacted in order to satisfy most of these contingencies. The written notice may be accompanied by a CAMR, cancellation mutual release. You can, of course, send it along with right away. You're assuming it's probably going to get signed, but that cancellation doesn't really mean anything if not signed without a notice. If the seller attempts a CAMR, cancellation and mutual release, the CAMR is not a notice of termination. If the CAMR is not signed by the buyer can deliver the proof of funds. Once the seller has actual receipt means the seller has it with them, not just with the listing agent, but the seller has it. The seller may no longer terminate the offer based on that provision. Any questions on that? Someone said it's tricky. It is tricky, but just always remember, look at the contract, look at what the duties are of the other agent in that contract, and just remember Sending over an amendment, sending over a notice does not satisfy any sort of contingency if it doesn't get signed. Now, in this situation, you didn't get what you were supposed to get, so you send over a cancellation of mutual release, and let's say the buyer signs it right away. Then you're good, right? But that's a risky thing to do without the notice. So you want to make sure you're always sending that notice over, because I always think of sending the notice kind of starts a new timeline, a new thing that we're looking at. Without that notice, you haven't officially said or demanded that document be sent over, or that you haven't received the document and now you're terminating the transaction. Same with inspection. Without a notice of defects, I've heard agents say, well, I sent over an amendment and it expires tonight, so if they don't sign it, they're in big trouble. If the seller doesn't sign it, you're in big trouble, because now you have allowed a deadline to pass and you're in a sticky situation. We just had a situation yesterday where we are on the purchase side, or we're on the selling side, and the loan commitment was due, I think 2 days ago, and we didn't get it. And now we learned that the buyer's financing fell through. But the buyer agent never sent us anything stating that the loan was going to be denied or the loan was denied, and they didn't do it until after the deadline. Well, now what? Now that buyer is contractually obligated to buy the home per the contract, because they no longer have a financing commitment contingency. It passed. So the buyer is walking away. They cannot buy the home, but seller's keeping earnest money, because honestly, that's what the contract says. And the buyer can't even fight it at this point. And it's unfortunate, because it all could have been prevented if their buyer agent had done a simple notice and let us know, the selling side, that financing was falling apart, and issued a loan denial letter from the lender. But unfortunately, that did not happen. And the buyer did not realize when the deadline was, and they cost their buyer thousands of dollars. So that's really unfortunate. And it also is a good sign that it matters who your agent is. So with that, we are going to dive into showings, how to schedule a showing, how to have a showing, how this all works, because there are some kind of best practices when it comes to showings. You are entering somebody else's home. You are walking in and really kind of getting yourself into a situation where people don't always realize that there is liability, and you want to make sure that you're following best practices. Somebody just asked me the other day, what happens if I break something in somebody's home? Well, as we know, the answer is always in the contract. And what the listing contract actually says is that the seller is taking responsibility for things that happen in their home, because they have homeowners insurance. And as long as someone isn't being negligent, right? Now, it's a little different if you pick up someone's vase and toss it across the room. Now things might look a little different. But that's where you consult an attorney and get their advice and opinion, because we are not attorneys. We cannot practice law. And we always want to make sure that we're running this past attorneys when we have questions like that. We also cannot enforce the contract. So we cannot just decide, oh, yeah, buyer has to pay for that or seller has to pay for that. You need to consult an attorney before you make demands like that. And that is why the WRA, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, is so helpful, because they are there to answer those questions for you and give you their opinion. And what's really nice is it's usually in writing. So you have something that you can share with a client, or just for your own peace of mind to know what the next step is if something like that ever happened. So we're going to take a look here at different pieces of showing etiquette. So we've got showing scripts today, we've got a home tour checklist, and we've got showing etiquette. So with that, I just want to go into some initial just how to schedule a showing. So this seems kind of silly to talk about, but in the beginning, a lot of people don't know how to schedule a showing. So we want to make sure that you know how to do this and you know what you're doing. Okay, so we are going to pop into a random house. We are in MLS. Of course, you want to make sure that you take MLS courses before you play around too much in MLS, so you feel like you have a really good understanding of it. My MLS does not want to play today. So you have a buyer, let's say, who's been set up on the MLS, they have access. Watch one of the contact searches and subscriptions videos on how to do that before you obviously set anybody up. And let's say this is the house that your buyer wants to see. They love it. They think it's perfect. They love everything about it. One thing I do first is I hit photos and I look through every photo. I just get an idea of what's in it, what's going on. Because as we talked about last time, they're going to have 5 must-haves. And I want to make sure that this house complies with their 5 must-haves to make sure that they didn't possibly look over something just with their excitement, right? They're excited. They see a house. They're like, oh my gosh. And they might not realize that the master bedroom is not on the main floor, which was a big requirement for them. Happens all the time. So it's your job to be vetting these houses because they told you their 5 must-haves for a reason. Now they're expecting you to vet these homes for them. So double check all their 5 must-haves, make sure that it fits. Okay, I always look at things right here. I want to know the lot description, the style. I want to know the garage situation. I want to know if it has central air or not, how the home is powered, what's going on there, bath description, what documents are on file, because I'm going to send those to the client ahead of time. Miscellaneous interior, there's a gas fireplace. So I just want to get familiar with the home and understand what we've got going on here. Obviously the beds, the baths, the school district, especially if that's important to the client. I want to know what the taxes are. I want to know what the acreage is. I want to know what the square footage is. I want to know the year that it was built. All that information is right here to help you get familiar with the home. So you need to spend at least, 10 minutes looking through the home before you schedule the showing to make sure it's a good fit. Read the remarks. Always read the private remarks because this is notes from agent to agent that only you can see. Your buyer cannot see these notes. So it's something that the listing agent is trying to tell you, okay? That's really important. You might see, hey, don't use showing time, call me for all showings or something like that. And then it'd be kind of silly if you then schedule through showing time and the agent goes, did you read private remarks? So make sure you read those private remarks. They are there for a reason. All MLS info to be verified if important. The offer to purchase kind of already says that, so that's okay. All offers must contain seller and COVID add-in docs. So I'm thinking that might be something that they just have been putting in for a while now. Seller does not cover gap. That's something to do with title insurance. You'd want to make sure in the gap insurance portion of the offer to purchase, you are saying that buyer is covering. Seller asks that earnest money is 1% of purchase price. Pretty standard that earnest money is usually around 1% of purchase price. So you could do that or more. And sellers have never been to the property. Okay. So technically a seller is still required to fill out a condition report unless they're a personal representative or there's a few different reasons why someone would not. But we'll take a peek here and see if we have a condition report. We have other. I always look through all the documents, see what we've got. Okay, they want this COVID-19 addendum. That's fine. And just make sure to read any addendum before your client sells it. I'm not sure what exactly it says. And then a seller's addendum to the contract. Also, I'm not familiar with either of these documents. So this would be something that I would sit down and read and make sure it doesn't undo any of my client's rights within the offer to purchase. So interesting. It does not have a condition report. That's something I would call the agent and ask why there isn't a condition report. So this is an interesting one to look at. I just grabbed one from the hot sheet. So it always, sometimes looking at them brings up more questions than answers. So this is one I might want to call the agent and just ask a few questions ahead of time. But let's say we like what we see, we're good to go. We're going to go ahead and schedule the showing. I would download the condition report and any other documentation, and I would email that to the client before the showing and just say, hey, here's some documents to look over before we go to our showing. I used to print them and bring them to the showing, read the room. It depends on the client. Some clients like paper, some, do everything digitally. So just know your client, know if it's something that they would like or not. Most of my clients, I'm going to email the documents over before the showing and not physically print them. My MLS is being a little interesting today. So if you hit showing time, it's going to take you right to the showing time website, and most listings are going to be within showing time. You're going to hit schedule a single showing. It says appointment required. So we are going to need to set an appointment. So know that when you set an appointment to begin, it's not confirmed. It's not confirmed until you get a confirmation email. So the confirmation email is going to give you access into the home. It's going to tell you what the lockbox code is or what the central lockbox serial number is. Whatever the access is, it will be there. It might say, hey, front door is under the, or key is under the front door mat, or seller will be on site, which is not ideal. Buyers don't typically feel the most comfortable if the seller is on site, but it just depends. For some reason, this isn't loading for me. I'll hit OK. We're scheduling a showing. Oh my gosh, I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, so we hit schedule a single showing, and here we are. So it gives you all the options. If it's blacked out, that means seller's not accepting a showing at that time. Let's say we want Wednesday at 11 a.m. We'll click on that. It's a showing, 11 to 12. Okay, let's say we want a full hour. What's the agency type? You could be pre-agency. You might be a buyer agent. This is where you are disclosing your agency relationship. So let's say I do have buyer agency with my client. I'm a buyer agent, and then enter your buyer's name. This registers them as the buyer that you are bringing in, and also will potentially become the seller's protected buyer list in the event that the listing expires. When you hit request appointment, and I'm not going to hit it because I don't intend on requesting an appointment here, it's either going to ask for, it's going to give a confirmation. In that case, it's going to send out a text, email, call to the seller directly, and they're going to accept or reject the showing. It might also go to the listing agent depending on who they have set up to accept showings. I changed listings in the meantime, and this one's actually a go and show, which means the second I request the appointment, it's going to be confirmed. A go and show means that the house is typically empty. It's vacant. No need to request an appointment because there's no one there to let know that there's going to be a showing anyway. So right here, we'd get the confirmation and we would be good to go. Then I would let the client know we are confirmed. I'll see you on this day at this time at this home, looking forward to it. So that is how you physically would request a showing or schedule a showing. And one thing I like to do is if there's many all at once, I like to make sure that the route makes the most sense so that we're not going here and then here and then here, that we have some sort of an organizational structure. So we want to make sure that we're doing that as well. You can schedule multiple showings at once by adding it to the showing cart versus just scheduling one showing. So you can have a cart going on where you have multiple showings and then they're actually not requested yet. You're going to send all the requests at one time. So this is where you would choose the buyer name and go through there. And if I just pick one here, I hit OK. And then I would send the requests all at once I have my map situated and I know where I'm going. So this one's added to cart, then I could add another to the cart. And the nice thing is it maps them all out for you. So it gives you your little route and then you can move them around. And if you had multiple, you could switch their order to make sure that you're going all in a nice organized way, depending on where everybody's going before and after. So that is your showing cart. Touched something new, didn't I? I have agents who've been doing this for a couple of years who are blown away by this. Yeah, then you don't have to use Google Maps or anything. You just do it all right here. I know that is the showing card. It's magical. So you scheduled your showing. Now what? So there is a checklist in here. You're going to find it actually, and we're going to dive deeper into it next time. I try to teach things in a very black and white manner of like, when this, do this. But showings can be a situation where you've got to use a little bit of common sense and your best judgment. So I always say, you always, 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 always are going to be calling the agent and talking to them before you ever write an offer. And that's right here, the pre-offer checklist and questions. That all lives right here and here. This is how you handle that. And then I've also got submitting an offer to the listing agent, the instructions on how to do that. Do you make this call and ask all these questions to the listing agent before the showing or after the showing? My answer is it depends. It totally depends. Because when you get to the showing, the buyer's going to start asking you questions like, why are they selling? Where are they going? What's going on? What's important to them? And they'll ask those questions more, especially as you teach them how important those questions are. If you schedule 10 showings in a day for them and you're running around, you may not ask all those questions to the listing agent before every single showing, especially if none of them seem particularly special to the buyer. On the flip side, if you have a buyer who's like, this is the house, I am so excited, I already know I'm probably going to write an offer when we get there, I can't wait, I'm so excited to see it, then yes, you are going to call the agent before the showing to make sure of a few different things. Sometimes when an offer gets accepted, let's say I'm sitting with my seller right now and we're about to accept one of the offers that we have on the table. If you schedule a showing right now, you're in front of the house to go and show, and you schedule a showing right now, you have no idea that the seller is literally sitting down right now and accepting an offer. It's not until the listing agent goes in and physically changes it from active to accepted with offer, which technically they have like 24 hours to do that. So there could be an entire day where there's an accepted offer on this house that to you looks completely available. And this whole time it's got an accepted offer. Now that's the hard part about this is there's nothing worse than a buyer falling in love with a home and then you find out it has an accepted offer. So do your due diligence and make sure that it doesn't, okay? And you do that just by asking the agent. So some of the questions that you're going to ask ahead of time. This is kind of how the conversation goes. I'm literally going to enact this or like kind of go through it with you because it's physically how I ask the questions. And I think it really makes a difference. So Andy, you want to be my listing agent?
Sure.
Because sometimes the listing agent does not want to talk to you. Keep that in mind. Some listing agents are just angry and they don't want to have a conversation and they're not used to people calling. And there's a few reasons you do want to call. First is you actually need to know this information. It's not a good idea. It's actually horrible practice to not have a conversation with the listing agent ahead of time and just send over an offer to purchase. That listing agent has no idea it's coming. They maybe had some specific things they needed to talk to you about before you wrote the offer, like some things that are important to the seller, what's going on right now, what the seller's situation is. And technically, I have had this happen where I've literally accepted, we have multiple offers, we've accepted one, and then I'm, sleeping and it's midnight and randomly I get an offer in my inbox and we accepted an offer at 10 p.m. You could have done everything in the world, like send out showing time requests saying we have multiple offers on the table, everything. But if people don't pay attention and don't listen, now what that other agent has done is completely wasted their buyer's time. The buyer now thinks they have a chance at getting this house. And the buyer agent could have completely prevented this by calling you that evening and asking these questions. Okay, so don't be that agent. So Andy, you are, just make sure to talk loud. You are the listing agent and I am calling you. You're in a bad mood. I'd rather have everyone learn how to deal with a bad mood listing agent than a good mood listing agent. Good mood listing agent is wonderful, but it's not always the case. You never know how you're catching someone and you never know what the situation is. So I have a buyer who I'm going to say, we're going to go see the property this afternoon. And I already can tell it's like the perfect house for them. And they're really excited to see it. We're just seeing the one. Ring, ring.
Hello.
Hi, Andy. This is Morgan Schnabel with Abundance. How are you?
Great.
Good, good. So we have a showing scheduled tonight on your listing on Main Street, and we are really, really excited to see it. And I just had a few questions for you if you have a second.
Sure.
Cool. So just wanted to know, obviously beautiful house. I can see everything in MLS. I read the condition report, so I've got all of that, but just want to know for the buyer's sake, why is the seller selling?
They're gonna upgrade.
They're going to upgrade. Okay. Awesome. Is anything contingent upon this house selling kind of thing?
No, just no. Everything's in the MLS. Is there anything you need specifically?
Yeah. So, timeline wise, is there really anything important to the seller, like a closing date or anything like that we need to know?
Yeah, it needs to be at the end of the month. Exactly.
The end of this month.
Yeah, on the 30th.
It's the 13th.
We need 1 month to prepare.
Okay, so about 30 days. Okay, this buyer is really, really well qualified. So I can tell you right now that it's not an issue. They are pre-approved with XYZ mortgage. They are good to go, solid. I'm actually going to have that mortgage lender also give you a call later just to confirm that, because I always want to make sure that you feel really good about the buyer that you are presenting to your seller.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you had any other interest in the property?
A couple said they're gonna write, but I haven't seen anything yet.
I know. So no offers on the table? Okay, sounds good. Let's say we were to write an offer this evening. When are you able to look at them with the seller?
Well, as soon as they come in, we're pretty good.
Okay, so we're seeing it at 6 o'clock. So if I did like a 10 a.m. deadline tomorrow, that would be okay?
Should be.
Okay, no, that's great. I just know they're excited. So you know how it is waiting, and buyers get so excited and want to know right away, but I also want to be mindful of your time and the sellers. Okay. And then anything else we should know?
No, just tour it. You'll see anything that pops out at you, and everything else is in the MLS and on the condition report. So.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad I got to talk to you, introduce myself and the buyers, and hopefully I'll be sending over an offer soon. If I do, I will shoot you a text just to confirm that I'm sending it over. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. You weren't grumpy enough. You could have been way grumpier. I've had listing agents that were way grumpier as well, who are like, why are you calling? And like you said, you kept saying, look at MLS. You get that a lot. Like, look at MLS. Great.
Look at MLS. Like I just said, so I'm gonna assume it's not important if it's not. So okay, thank you.
Yeah. So you do your best, and I kill them with kindness. And honestly, I really don't care if I embarrass myself or annoy them, because at the end of the day, you're listing a house. You know that you're going to get calls. You should get calls, and you should be grateful that there's a buyer agent on the other end who's responsible and timely and diligent. What I'm proving to you right now, I might be, yes, asking tangible questions that I need to know, like preferred closing date. But what I'm also doing is I'm building rapport. I'm building a relationship, and I'm telling you, without telling you, that I am great to work with, very respectful, and super diligent. And who doesn't want to work with someone who's super diligent, respectful, and great to work with? Like, that's perfect, because when you have multiple offers on the table, you want to know that the agent you choose is going to be one that's going to get you to closing. Because who makes or breaks transactions, really? It's the agents. It's the agents getting along or not getting along, being challenging, not working together, not putting your minds together and getting to the closing table together, because everyone's really on the same team here. We want happy buyers. We want happy sellers. We want everyone to feel good about the transaction. It's not me versus you. I'm going to get what I want and win, and you're going to try. I want you to lose. Like, there is no win-lose. That is not fun for anyone. A buyer does not want a seller to lose. A seller does not want a buyer to lose. A seller wants a wonderful person to come and take the home that they've loved and love it just as much as they did. Typically, even if it's a flip or an investor, you want someone to take this home that's very special and love it and care for it. And that's really what you want at the end of the day. You want happy buyers, happy sellers, and you want the other agent to be grateful to have worked with you, because every market is small, and people are going to remember if you were a jerk to work with, or if you were exceptionally on top of things, organized, put together, diligent, and really nice to work with. There's nothing better than working with another agent who says, okay, we're going to figure this out together. Let's go. That's the kind of agent you want to work with. And that's the kind of agent that you want to be. Be the kind of agent that you want to work with. And you will find when you get the opportunity to work with another agent like that, it is so smooth, so great, such a great experience. And everybody is really happy at the end. And at the end of the day, it should be. We're in a really, really happy career where we're fulfilling dreams. And helping people build wealth long-term, what is negative about that? Are you going to have hiccups along the way? Yes. You're going to have flooded basements. You're going to have, issues with inspection. Are you going to have broken windows? You're going to have stuff happen. You're going to have financing fall through the day before closing. You're going to have appraisal issues. It's going to appraise $4,500 low. That's all going to happen. But when you're with another agent who says, okay, we're going to get to the bottom of this and we're going to work through this, that's really great. And then it doesn't need to be such a bad situation at all. So those are the questions you're going to ask ahead of time before the showing, really, if it's one the buyer is going to like. If you have a list of 10 homes or 8 homes, you definitely can do this before every single one, but you don't have to. Now, if you do see a home and the buyer ends up completely loving it, then you want to make this exact call that I just made. But instead of saying, hey, we're scheduled to see this tonight, you're going to be saying, hey, we just saw this home and the buyer wants to write an offer. I have some questions for you. And then these are the main questions you're going to be asking. So that's extremely important. And next class, we're going to be talking about how to prepare to write that offer, talking through the offer to purchase with the buyer, all of that. But today we're just focusing on showing. So here's different home showing etiquettes. So you always want to focus on the best homes. So here's a script for you. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, when we do find the right home for you, we will need to act quickly. So this is important to prepare them, because you might get buyers who are like, we're going to think on it a few days. Not really an option here. And you want to make sure you're talking about this right away, even in the buyer consult, because then they're not feeling like you're tricking them or scamming them. You do truly need to act quickly. And you may have that feeling of, well, is there something better out there? This happens a lot when it's the first home they've ever seen. And it definitely happens where you take them into the first home they've ever toured and they fall in complete love with it. And then they ultimately tell you that they decide to pass on it because it's the first home and they know there's probably better ones out there. And then months down the road, they look at you and say, we really wish we would have bought that initial house. That totally happens. And I wish I had a good way to prevent it, because you can't really force a buyer to buy your home. But what you can do is you can tell them that story and say, hey, I know someone who this happened to. If a buyer loves a home, feels at home there, it has every amenity they want, their 5 must-haves, that's not that easy to find. Especially in this market where there's not a crazy amount of inventory. If they love the home, write the offer. And I don't say that so you get the transaction. I say that because it's not all the time that a buyer falls in love with a home. Sometimes it takes a buyer seeing 100 homes before they fall in love. So I always say that when you know, the buyer does truly know. And I've always told buyers that I will spend more time talking you out of writing an offer. I'll never talk you into writing an offer, because I don't need to. When you know. If you want to write an offer on that home, I'm not going to sit here and say, you really should write an offer. That's not right. What I'm here to do is help you navigate the ins and outs and make sure that we get you to closing in an efficient way that protects you and protects your rights. So it says, but I have to tell you, the best homes sell right away because they're the best homes. Do you want to view every home, or do you want to find the right one quickly? Okay, so that's a script. So with their 5 must-haves, is it a really good fit, or are the buyers letting an emotional factor cloud their better judgment? If it doesn't seem like a good match to you, take advantage of the opportunity to further fine-tune their wants and needs. So you're going to be revisiting their 5 must-haves all the time. Simply asking 2 or 3 questions can save you an hour of time viewing a home that does not meet their criteria. You told me that a master bedroom on the first floor was one of your 5 must-haves. 2 of the homes you just sent me don't have that. Is that something you're willing to give up? And then you're either going to get, well, we didn't realize it didn't have a master on the first floor. So yeah, forget those 2. Or they'll say, we love this home so much that we'd be willing to sacrifice that. Okay, well, now you're learning probably not a must-have anymore. It's a want, not necessarily on the worthy of the 5 must-haves. So when you're showing homes, we talked about always calling the listing agent to see if there's any offers, and of course, asking those questions. Set the home tour date with the buyer. Try to give 24-hour notice if you can. If it's a going show, doesn't really matter. You want to talk through earnest money before you go into a home that you think they might be writing an offer on. Talk to them about earnest money. Just remind them, hey, there's usually a 2 to 5 day deadline. We usually put something like 3 days, it defaults to 5, to make sure you have earnest money ready. So if you're showing them a $500,000 house, just remind them, hey, want to just remind you of that earnest money? Are you ready to go with a $5,000 check to submit right away if we get an accepted offer? Want to make sure just to remind them of that. Preview homes, eliminate any not within the criteria. Prepare and educate yourself about the home and demographics. Where are schools? Where are parks? You want to be able to speak to what they're looking at. If you are not an expert on a certain area and you live 45 minutes away, well, you better become an expert, because you want to make sure that you are practicing competently and using expertise. It's not fair to a buyer if you don't know the area. That's really not fair. Then you should have referred it out to somebody who does know the area. Arrange to meet with your buyer at the office or in front of the first home that you'll be touring. So that can always be interesting with home tours. I have had people who have flown in who, let's say, work out of state, and you have to, go pick them up. Always, if you do pick them up, show up with coffee, make it exciting. Text and ask, 20 minutes before you pick them up, what's your coffee order? Do what you can to make it an exciting day. And that really does make a difference. Otherwise, if they live nearby, they're usually just following you. Print out 2 detailed MLS information sheets. So those are right here. Anytime you go to print an MLS sheet, you're literally just going into the listing and hitting print. And then that's going to print out the listing with your information on it. There are so many different views that you can choose from that show your picture in different places. So play around with that, pick what your favorite one is. But just to give you an example of this, I'm not going to print this just now, but it's going to give you a PDF here. Ooh, I don't want that view, obviously. So you're going to change the view to be the one that you want. And this is list. I don't want the list. I want, and you can play around with this. Now it's giving me a list because I'm in a million listings right now. So when you are in just one listing, it's going to give you only one listing. So if we just go into it, 6314. I know I had one selected, but it was just trying to. So yeah, you're going to just go in, print, and it's going to give you a document with your name on it and your picture. So make sure in your MLS that you have your picture and everything set up in your settings and in your profile. So place the MLS tour sheets in order to make sure you're ready to go, so you have something to give them. Again, you can always email these too, or if you carry an iPad, you can always show them on the iPad when you're in the showing. So it's up to you how you want to do that, but you do want to make sure you have something to show them. And then make a copy of the 5 must-haves. Keep that up. Maybe you have an iPad where you keep a folder of everybody's information. The KB Core app is really, really helpful to have all your stuff in one place if you want to do that. So as far as etiquette goes, try to be the first one there if you can. If you're on a tour together, that can be kind of hard. But if you do have one showing scheduled, get there 15 minutes early if you can, if it's a go and show. Now, if somebody's physically in the house, don't go in early, of course. So if it's actually scheduled, there's people living there, you've got to be careful. But if it's a go and show, you can head on in, make sure all the lights are turned on. There's nothing worse than trying to navigate through a house and not knowing where any of the lights are. So when you go in, turn on all the lights, and when you leave the home as you found it. Do not turn things on besides the lights. Do not turn on the heater, the furnace. You're not doing an inspection. Do not turn things on. Don't turn the dishwasher on. Don't turn the stove on. Those are for the inspector to do. So I always tell a buyer, I literally caught a buyer once. They were kneeling down at the water heater and they were like, this water heater is on too high. This is dangerous. And they started to turn it down. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Don't touch people's water heater. Don't touch anyone's mechanicals or anything. Don't open a window. Don't touch things. If you do, you know, of course you can open things and open cabinets, pantry, but don't go through their underwear drawer. So just use common sense here, but just be careful. You know, if you open a window, latch it correctly shut, lock it, put things back the way that you found it. If something breaks, and at some point something will break, I have broken a key in a door handle. It wasn't me, but one of our agents walked backwards and knocked over an entire shelf full of like different china pieces. Things happen. If it happens, call the listing agent and tell them right away. Do not hide it. There's a central lock box. Everyone knows that you're there at this time. It is documented, so you can't hide from it. Plus, you don't want to. Just let the listing agent know right away and go from there, and let your broker know right away too. Be sure to look for and observe all touring notes in MLS, so you're making sure you're reading private remarks. Be mindful of pets. On the listing side, we do not want pets in the home when we list our properties because some people are really turned off by different kinds of pets. I've told you the snake house story. I won't dive into it again. If you want to find the snake house story, I think it is somewhere in a listing video. But be mindful of pets. Try not to, tinker with them too much. Of course, if it's a cat, they might come up to you, but just be careful not to let a pet out. If a pet is locked in a certain room, try to keep that pet where it belongs. Again, there shouldn't be pets there. This should not be your responsibility, but oftentimes it is. So just be very careful. Don't let pets out of the house. It's standard practice to leave a business card on the counter. It's up to you if you want to do that or not. I typically do not, but you definitely can. What it's doing is really letting the seller or the agent know that you were there and saw the home. That was before central lock, I think. That's where that started. Make sure to secure and lock the house when you leave. So obviously, if the door was locked when you got there, lock it. If it wasn't locked and it wasn't supposed to be unlocked, call the agent and just say, hey, it wasn't locked when I got here. Should I lock it when I leave, or did you intend to keep it unlocked? And then obviously notify the listing agent if you notice anything is wrong. And then we've got some objections here. We've also got some scripts, which I will link in the email after this. But objection, we really want a formal dining room. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, remember at our first meeting when we talked about there being no such thing as a 100% house? If somebody wants exactly what they want, they need to build. Refer to the 5 must-have sheet. We identified blank as being your 5 must-haves. A formal dining room. Has a formal dining room taken precedence over one of these items? If so, which one? Okay, so that's something we want to talk through. And then they might say, well, we have 6 must-haves. That's okay. Don't take that from them. But what you're doing is just really making sure that you are always in the know about what they want. Objection, we don't like the carpet, or we don't like the landscaping, or we hate the color purple and everything's purple in here. I hear what you're saying, and this home does offer you a chance to add your own personal touches. Would it be better for you to pay a higher price for the seller to make the changes, or just redo this one thing for yourself to meet your specific needs? That helps them put into perspective. You're going to pay to have these changes made. Either pay the seller, or you're going to pay after you buy the home. Also, those are all changeable things. The one thing you cannot change is the home's location. You can never change that. Most other things you can change. Obviously, you can't change the lot size or anything like that, but if you don't like the way that the kitchen is laid out, bring in a contractor. Maybe that can change. Objection. I want a great deal. This is overpriced. I'm going to wait for the market to crash. All sorts of those things, which you're going to hear lots of. Tell me, what is a great deal to you? Is the priority to get something that is just a low price, or are you more interested in finding the home that best suits your needs? If the home is exactly what you want, what is the most you'd be willing to pay for it? If we write low offers, you might lose the property that you love. Let's do the right thing and write the offer at a price that will cause the home to sell. Do you know what is happening in the market today? Most properties are being sold over asking price with multiple bids, and the market will change and evolve, but that's something to note. And one question I do always ask is, if they're hemming and hawing about offer price, keep in mind I talk about appraisal. If we have an appraisal contingency, I always say it doesn't really matter what your offer price is. If you have an appraisal contingency, you are basically saying, I'm willing to buy the house for what it appraises for. If they don't have an appraisal contingency or want an appraisal gap, then you talk about what those numbers could be. But if they're back and forth between, let's say, 250 and 265, and they are having such a hard time, you can always talk through the accelerator clause and possibly adding in that accelerator, a certain price up to a max of blank with going X amount over the next highest transaction we'll talk about in the offer to purchase. But you also can say, okay, well, At what price? If I told you tomorrow, I'm so sorry, you did not get the house. And then I was able to find out what the accepted offer price really was. And I told you it was X amount. At what price would you no longer be upset that someone else got it? For example, if I told you that the accepted offer was at 263, would you be upset? And they'll say, yes, I was willing to go up to 266 or 265. Great. If I told you the accepted offer was at 267, would you be okay with that? And when they finally say, yes, that is the price that I would be like, you know what, someone else take it. Now we found our offer price. And that's typically how I get there, especially if somebody's not able to get there on their own. Of course, we always run comps. We look at what the neighborhood is selling for and make sure that we're in range, because there will 100% be times where every home in that neighborhood has been selling in the low threes and this house is listed at 275. And it's psychological. If a buyer is saying, well, I don't want to offer 30,000 over list, I always have the attitude of list price means nothing. Okay. We're offering what the home is worth, what we think is a fair price for this home. What would you be willing to pay? Get list price out of your mind. Maybe they priced it incorrectly. Okay. Not our problem. What is a price? What is a fair price for this home? What is fair market value? That's what we're going to offer. Maybe a little bit more if you're willing to go over, because it's your absolute dream house. But at the end of the day, a house is worth what someone is willing to pay for it. So that price conversation really gets interesting when you dive in. And these scripts will help you kind of get there. But just know that buyers sometimes need to be guided. They're going to have a lot of questions, and you are there to answer every single one of them and help them in this journey. And I always try to tell them, this should be fun. All you need to do is look at homes and pick out what you love, and I take care of the rest. And that's what buying a home really should be. So that is our conversation on showings. You now know how to schedule a showing. I've got this home tour checklist in here too. If you've got a really high C buyer who wants to check all these things off along the way, they definitely can, where they can keep track of all things in regards to the home, the flooring, the walls, the bathroom, the kitchen, the basement, the garage, and really get an idea for what's going on in the home if they like to kind of compare and contrast. But of course, the MLS sheet gives you most of this information. All right, that is all we have for today, and everyone have a good day.